recording ஆரம்பிச்சிட்டு பண்ணி. Divakar, you have it? Are you host?
Yes, she is now.
Right. Good morning, friends. I think this is the first time we are having a session in the morning. ரொம்ப கஷ்டம் தான். ரொம்ப சீக்கிரம் எழுந்திருக்க வேண்டியதாக இருக்கு. I think all of us. But எனக்கு, yeah. Divakar will have a different but anyways, we'll talk about it later. See, to connect to where we stopped last the first session on copyrights, we discussed about what copyright is all about, what copyright law is, what protection that copyright offers, what all subject matter that could be protected as copyright. We also discussed several landmark cases where the courts have beautifully analyzed. If you look at copyright law of copyright, it's more or less a judge-made law. It started off as a common law copyright, then it was statutory copyright. So it's more or less a judge-made laws, and each and every case is beautifully analyzed the principles of copyright law. So, and it's vast. So we discussed about what copyright is all about, basically section 13 and 14. But then we would want to continue in discussing and sharing about what happens once you get a copy. How do you protect it? The remedies that is available to a copyright owner. A copyright owner vis-a-vis the author, if there are two different people. So, Satish, take over. This is your...
Morning, everybody. See, let us just remember one thing that we discussed in the last presentation. That is, copyright is a negative right. We'll have to start from there, in the sense that we do not, or it is not necessary for the owner of the copyright to use the copyright, but his rights will still be protected. And in that sense, if you look at the first quote from the judgment of Justice Parker in 1910, where he says it is property and an action to restrain the infringement of the rights will lie even if no damage is shown. See, when we discuss various case laws, you will find this particular point again and again repeated as a theme, where the judges have always held that the other person not being affected is not anything to go by as a defense. So that is something which is very important when we deal with infringement of copyright. There is no need to prove damage, as in the sense that I am affected. So it is a negative right in that sense, and that is what we need to look into. Just keep this at the back of the mind, so that we will, when we discuss the judgments, it is easier. And the second judgment is probably the second most often quoted judgment after R.G. Anand versus Deluxe Films that we discussed last time, was the Indian Performing Rights Society. We'll discuss more on this judgment in the course of this session. But please see the beautiful explanation of the law with regard to copyright by Justice Krishnayan. He says, the enigmatic smile of Mona Lisa is the timeless heritage, but till it is liberated from the prescribed passage of time of private copyright, the maker says, hands off. And that, my dear friends, is the key to the entire copyright law. If the law is there, if the protection is afforded under the law of copyright, hands off. Whether I'm using it, whether I'm not using it, it is immaterial. It is hands off. And that is what we will see in the line of judgments that we will see.
What a powerful word, hands off. Conveys conveys the entire gamut of the rights that a copyright owner has in by just that one word, hands off. So,
what the purport of the words hands off is brought forth in section 51. So section 51 of the Copyright Act defines what an infringement can be, what can be considered as an infringement, where there are 5 clear indicators or factors which have to be considered. These 5 factors are not ordered in this provision. We have brought it out as 5 factors in the bullet points. See, there is any person can infringe. That is the first thing. It can be a company, it can be any juristic person, anyone. And second is that particular use by such a person is not with the permission or license or approval of any kind. The consent of the owner is the most important factor. The third one being the owner has a particular right which is exclusive to him, and that exclusive right is being overrun by the other person who is using it without the consent. So the exclusive right of the owner has to be there in respect of a particular issue, and the other person, the first person, is doing something that infringes or that violates that particular exclusive right. And
so basically, Diwakar, what? Okay, complete.
Yes, and the fourth being that exclusive right has to be conferred by the Act, which is the most and the most vital aspect as far as this infringement provision is concerned. Section 14 of the Copyright Act lists out what are the rights that are available for owner of the copyright, and these conferred rights are the only rights statutorily provided to a copyright. Other rights, the rights that are not covered under this provision, are not available, is what the statute and the judges from time immemorial have been stated. So this is
to put it simply, if friends, you remember our last session, section 13 and 14, nowhere in the Act and nowhere in the world a copyright is defined. What is a copyright? It is not defined. What acts are copyrights is what is defined. The copyright, the subject matters of copyright defined. A copyright owner can do certain things are defined. An infringement, in simple terms, is that things that a copyright owner can do under the Act, if it is done by a third party without his consent. A consent has to be in writing, a written consent by a third party, then that becomes infringement. Correct?
Yes, sir.
So what are all the acts? What are all the acts that the law provides? What all the acts that a copyright owner can do, and what will consider infringement?
See, that is the next part of the infringement provision. So what it says is that, see, infringement has been defined as those acts. Now, those acts can be done in various ways: by making a copy, by selling it, by storing it or displaying it in a particular place. See, now this storing it or displaying it in a particular place is very vital, because this is very specious to copyright law as such. Because making, selling are all, yes, infringement, but displaying it is also infringement, because that will have its own repercussions as far as cinematography, film, sound recording, all those things. So that we will be covering in the later stage. And then offering it for sale, distributing, exhibiting and displaying is more or less in a similar perspective. So all these things are considered to be a chain of infringement. So from the day, from the way person who makes that to the person who displays or exhibits in the shop front, for example, all of them will be covered to be infringers under the Act. So all of them will be liable for infringement. Satish, sir.
In fact, if we could actually connect the last 2 slides and section 14, which we had discussed in the last session, what it actually tells us is that you can do nothing without the permission of the owner. And it starts from the manufacturer till the ultimate purchaser or the seller, sometimes even the purchaser. Sometimes even the purchaser becomes liable for infringement. So it is a very wide right in that sense. And this wide right is in consonance with what copyright is, because copyright itself is a very widely described right. Divakar, you can-
And therefore it is a negative right.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. We'll have to look at that in that circle.
So therefore, we now know what an infringement is, and who are all the persons who will be held liable when it comes to infringement of a copyright. So when next comes the remedies.
So, Divak, let me stop you here,
Yes.
because this is where I wanted to share the story. Why it is important to decide what remedy and how you approach these remedies. Of course, if you find it direct, both civil and criminal infringement of copyright is also a criminal offense. I just wanted to share with you guys, what happened when probably, I think, the early part of 2000, when I was working in a law firm in Delhi. I was in charge of the anti-piracy activities. I was, one of my responsibilities in this law firm was to liaise with the policemen across southern part of India. I was living in Bangalore then, and try and stop the film piracy. Obviously, infringement of copyright. So one of my first trips, 2-3 trips later, Mangalore, the town of Mangalore, not Bangalore, Mangalore, it has a unique thing where they used to have video parlors. They used to have a 100 square feet hall, 20-30 chairs, a projector, all latest VCDs and DVDs of those times. They will screen. The surprising part is they will have posters. It will be written in Kannada and English. It will be posted. There will be posters on the walls across the town. I met a couple of trips to the SP. It wasn't helping. And finally, one of the exhibitors said, "Sir, there is a DSP who is willing to act against these people. Please come." So I said, "Okay. Any opportunity that I can to get these guys, work, see if criminal remedy works." So I went to Mangalore. I entered the DSP's office along with the exhibitor, a theatre owner, and we met the DSP. I said, "This is an issue. This is an infringement of copyright, and please, you need to do something." I think there was a time when one of the Harry Potter movies was released, and also a James Bond movie was released. 2002 or 3, I'm not very sure. So I met the DSP. I said, "What is the problem? Why can't you? Why is it difficult to conduct a raid or act against them?" I said, "You tell me. The information to all these people goes from your office." I said, "No, it is not possible." He said, "Let us do one thing. I am here for 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, if you go outside, you will see all the posters will be changed." And then before I left, I said, "Please inform your staff inside the police station that I'm a distributor of the James Bond movie. So I've come to meet you regarding piracy of the James Bond movie. Just inform them. I will go. I will wait for 2 days. Nothing will happen. I will leave the town and go to somewhere else, wait for 2-3 days, and then come back." He said, "Yes, let us do it." So I went out, and as I said, by the time I came out, every poster across the town has changed to some Tamil movies or some old English movies. No James Bond. There was no English movies at all. Then for 2 days, I was there. They did not screen. So then DSP spread the message that I'm leaving town because there was no infringement happening. So I left. I went to Manipal. I met the SP there. I stayed there for 2 days. After 2 days, one of the exhibitors started screening the latest Harry Potter movie. So I called the DSP. See what I told you. Information was leaked from your office. They know that I'm only a distributor of the James Bond movie, so they are screening Harry Potter movie. What do you say now? So let us rate. You don't come to my station. Don't come to the station. You go to this video parlor directly. I will bring my team there. We'll conduct a raid. We go there. We catch this person red-handed. He was screening Almost all the college students are sitting there, 30 rupees per ticket, I think, at that point of time, 2002, 2003. And then this video Paras starts arguing with the DSP. He does not have any right to question the Harry Potter movie because he's a distributor for James Bond. And the DSP adds, how do you know he is a distributor? And this one coolly says, he just looks like one, that's all. 10 minutes into the raid, the DSP gets a phone call. He goes out, speaks on his phone, comes back and says, Rajesh, I have an urgent chain snatching case to attend to. I am leaving a team headed by a sub-inspector. He will complete the formalities. You meet me in the office. Formalities, nothing, not completed. They say, let us go to the station and I'll charge, register the FIR, etc., etc. There. They do something. The DSP is not there. They say, please meet the DSP tomorrow. The next 2 days I was there. I know the DSP never turned up. So the criminal remedy, in fact, the reason why I am mentioning this is because a couple of days ago we had a discussion in another group about, there are a couple of arguments on, because now there is an attempt to decriminalize certain offences. And there was a discussion on whether the offences on trademarks and copyrights should also be decriminalized. I think there was a public forum where they need to give an opinion. So there's a discussion happening in one of our professional association. There were a couple of views that the entire criminal jurisprudence in IPR should be removed. So I kind of think that putting up probably with the same experience that, this is not working because police are not really prevalent with these offences and they are not able to focus completely on this. But to me, that is childish because, you will need to give a proper infrastructure. You need to, of course, corruption is there everywhere. But if properly applied, all these laws are properly applied, criminal remedies can also be an effective remedy. And it is very essential. Anyways, that is a discussion, that is an ongoing discussion. But this is something that came to my mind right now because it is very important to decide what you choose, whether you choose a civil remedy or a criminal remedy, because you need to create an impact. You need to make sure that this message, say for example, the film piracy that I was talking about, that's very, very rampant. Even now, it's, you download a torrent and you watch all the movies. We will talk about the piracy a little later in the session. But by an act of piracy, so many genuine people who work in the industry, they lose. Forget the directors, forget the actors, they make money. But that's only top 2%, 3%. There are hundreds of people working, like the camera people carrying things, stuff and everything. They need to survive and they can survive only if the industry survives. And the combination of civil and criminal remedy would be very effective, but we need to curb certain things, we need to improve certain things, we need to provide proper infrastructure to the criminal enforcement authorities to make it better. So I just wanted to share that because this has always been a very disturbing story because an officer of a DSP level saying, I have an important chain snatching case to attend to and just leaves. For the next 3 days, he doesn't come to his office at all. That is the state, that is the pressure he gives. I'm not blaming him. I'm just saying that is the pressure he's put to. But fortunately, now all the video parlors are jobless because everything is now digital, everything is available online, nobody goes. That is I think almost all the video parlors are gone now. Divakar.
Sir, yes. So when, as we saw in the last slide and what Mr. Rajesh had put up, there are two remedies now. One is civil and one is criminal remedy. As far as civil remedy is concerned, it is covered under Section 55 of the Act, where it lists out the prayers that you can seek. So you can seek for an injunction, permanent injunction, damages, condition of accounts, delivery of property. So these are most likely Section 55 and Section 62 is in pari materia with the provision under the corresponding provision under the Trademarks Act, which we earlier saw. As Section 62 is also, it also talks about the jurisdiction point of view. So as far as jurisdiction point of view, what the Trademarks Act and Copyright Act says is that the district court where the plaintiff resides and carries on business.
Divakar, one second. Sudi is texting that the audio is very low.
Mine?
Yes.
Okay. Let me check it out. Is it clear now?
I am clear to me. Satish, can you hear?
Satish, sir?
Yeah. I think there was a slight problem.
Okay. Now
continue.
Okay. So as far as jurisdiction is concerned, the Section 62 talks about the plaintiff's place of business having a jurisdiction in addition to whatever is there in Section 20 of the CPC. Mr. Satish, about the judgment.
Yeah, in fact, the issue of jurisdiction, traditionally under the Civil Procedure Code, the jurisdiction is always chasing the defendant, where the cause of action arises or where the defendant resides and carries on business and so on. But Section 62 of the Copyright Act is a departure to the general law. It is an exception in that sense, where it says where the plaintiff resides or carries on business can be the place to sue. That is a marked difference from the general law itself. I do not think there is a provision similar to Section 62 in any other branch of law, except in the intellectual property law. We have these provisions, and that too only in the Copyrights Act and the Trademarks Act. The Trademarks Act had brought that amendment only in the 99 Act, which came in 2003. But this provision, this Section 62, has been there since 1957. And the reason which is given, which is found in the parliamentary debates when Section 62 was introduced, is to say that authors or owners usually have been, very they were not very rich, in the sense that they could not chase the defendant wherever he was residing, who was big publishers and so on. So therefore, an option was given to them to sue where they resided, which is now the provision in the Trademarks Act also. It is now more plaintiff friendly in that sense. And the judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court, Ex Farfama 2004, actually goes to the extent of saying, even in a case where notice is sent, that would amount to a cause of action, and you can sue where the notices have been exchanged. But that's in a slightly different context, in the sense that where the notice itself becomes a cause of action, because it's a groundless threat suit. But 62 is now clarified by the Supreme Court also, where it is in addition to the other things. It is not as if you cannot go where the defendant is. If you do not want to, or if you cannot go to the defendant's place, you can sue at your place, is what the law is. And exactly, this is this Section 60 is what Ex-Far judgment was actually dealing with, where there is a unique provision which is available across all the intellectual property laws, be it trademarks or patents, where you can actually sue a person who is threatening to file an infringement case against you. You can say that the threat that he has issued to me by way of this notice or circular is wrong, and you can get a declaration for that effect. The suit will be for a suit for declaration saying that the threat is illegal. But there is there are judgments also which have now clarified that issue. But if the defendant or the person who had actually issued that notice follows it up with a civil suit for injunction against you, your first suit for groundless threat would be dismissed. In fact, Justice Sundar had recently dismissed the suit on that basis in the commercial courts in Chennai now. Therefore, this unique remedy is to protect people from being threatened illegally. But if the threat is actually not just a threat and is enforced as a right, then this remedy is not available. And in fact,
Satish, I just wanted to add,
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to add. Basically, when we filed groundless threat of legal proceedings one day, when to make sure that these guys either come to court, file a suit against you, or just leave you.
Exactly. It works both ways.
Because what happens is there is always either a threat by a phone or just simple letter saying that you are violating, I'm going to take action against you. Constant harassment happens to all these small traders if it's about talking about trademarks or copyright, the labels and all. And when such things happen, this provision comes in handy because you will push the person challenging or your use or your activity to say that either you do not have a copyright, but if you have, come file a case against me, either civil or criminal. Approach the legal authorities, fight it there. Don't just give blatant threats. Don't stop with that. Come fight me. At least so you push them to file a suit against you.
In fact, strategically now, what I think is issuing a notice would be a redundant thing. You can actually file a civil suit if there is an infringement, but if such notices actually happen, then this is the law. You can actually file such suit for declaration, and that is again a provision which is available across all the intellectual property laws, and it is actually different from Section 34 of the Specific Relief Act. It is there was one judgment which is now under appeal, where there is an interplay between Section 60 of the Copyright Act and Section 34 of the Copyright Act, because there is a divergent provision under both. Probably we'll discuss it at a later point of time, sometime when we have more time on this. Divakar, you can. Now let's jump to the actual issues of infringement. And all of us, that is myself, Mr. Rajesh and Divakar, have always shared a passion for 3 judgments of the Madras High Court. One.
Well, Rajesh, let me just start and then hand it over.
Yes, sir. Please.
Because I think, just like I said, we are all passionate about these 3 things. Friends, if you just want to learn what copyright law is, how to deal with infringement of copyright, how to handle the evidence, and including what remedies to be claimed. Don't go anywhere. Just look at the 3 judgments that we are going to talk about now, because we're going to spend some time in talking about these 3 judgments, because these 3 judgments lays the foundation and gives it provides you the entire gamut of copyright law. It is not 100 pages, 500 pages judgments that as we see now, but this probably not each and every case does not go beyond 10 pages. But the entire gamut of copyright law is discussed by our High Court judges. Where I think one of the occasions where I can very proudly say we practice in this court. Satish, start.
10 pages after trial.
In fact, all these 3 are division bench judgments, by the way. And I'll just add to what Mr. said, because this judgment also talks about what should be cross-examined and what cannot be questioned in cross-examination also. If you look at some portions of the judgment, it also makes that portion very clear. Basically, coming to the facts of this particular case, Kannaiah vs. Balraj, we always had this calendar in South India, especially with Sivakasi being such a popular venue. The figures of gods or the photographs of the gods have been reprinted as calendars. This is one such case where there was a photograph of Lord Muruga. The photograph basically is Lord Muruga in a very young age, just like a boy or so, where there is a peacock and there is a whale in one of his hands. So there was a case filed against the plaintiff, against the defendant, and the single judge dismisses the suit, saying that how else will you draw Lord Muruga if it is without the whale or without the peacock. The single judge dismisses the case. On appeal by the plaintiff, the division bench sets aside the single judge judgment and allows the appeal. And in allowing the appeal, they say, yes, it is necessary that you will take some common elements. But how will you find out that there is an infringement? How to find out there is an infringement? And what would amount to infringement? And dear friends, please remember that this is under the old act, which is the 1911 Act. There is nothing drastically changed in terms of the legal position except the wordings which define infringement. The wordings which were used then were colorable limitation. That is under the 1911 Act. If the defendants
1940, 1911 is the UK Act based on 1940.
Yeah. So the defendant's work, whether it is a colorable imitation of the plaintiff's work, that would be the issue. Now the issue is whether the defendant has substantially reproduced the plaintiff's work. Now, if we actually look at this particular judgment, there are portions where the judges have gone beautifully into various aspects of copyright law. And I just read from the judgment. Please note if it is needed. Paragraph 5 in the judgment says, what is required is the expenditure of original skill or labor in execution and not originality of thought. This is something that we had seen in the last session itself. So what is required is the originality of thought. We all know how Muruga looks like. How I express him in my idea. How I express him with whatever I have in my mind and the skill which I expend in bringing out the form. That, my dear friends, is the judgment. And I'll just continue that paragraph. Though the pictorial representation of Muruga in human form is a subject which is common to everyone, still, if a picture of Lord Subramania is drawn by an artist made up of conventional ideas as to his posture, etc., it certainly entitles him to claim copyright in the product of his labor. No more need to be said to reject the contention of so and so that the appellant firm did not possess copyright in the picture. So the defense was that there was no copyright if the idea is just there. And they wanted to say it is just, if I have to draw Muruga, it is going to be the same person. So the defense that there is no copyright at all was struck down. And further down, what the court also says is that the copy is that which comes so near to the original as to suggest that original to the mind of every person seeing it. Applying this test, the degree of resemblance between the two pictures which is to be judged by the eye must be such that the person looking at the defendant's picture must get the suggestion that it is the plaintiff's picture. In this sense, the points of similarity assume some importance, and therefore they go on to test the similarities between the two pictures, and they find that in this particular case there was a peacock which had the feathers. The number of eyes in the feathers were identical. The number of Rudraksha beads were identical, and the court, finding that evidence, says that this cannot be a coincidence at all. Years later, a judge would also use, Justice Prabha Sridevan had used this very point and has used in another case, saying this cannot be a mere coincidence. So a mere coincidence, it is not a mere coincidence, is what the division bench holds, and says that whether you had it in your front or not is not the question, whether you have seen it and whether you have reproduced it. Only when you reproduce it will you have these identical circumstances where the number of feathers being the same, the number of eyes in the feathers being the same, and the number of Rudraksha beads, etc., are the same. Holding that, the Supreme Court says, indeed, every intelligent, the division bench says, indeed, every intelligent copying must introduce a few changes, and we find evidence of such intelligent copying in the few changes introduced in the shape of the trident, in the posture of the arms, in the position occupied by the face of the peacock and cobra in the pictorial representation. These do not constitute the criteria of an independent work, and therefore they go on to grant injunction. In fact, the difference, I mean, this is a case, mind you, of the year 1961. The difference actually tried to be defended by the defendant was just something like our Kumudam R. Vidyasangan. In fact, they have actually gone on to argue that the plaintiff had in the plaintiff's picture, the hands were on the right hand was on the peacock, whereas on the defendant's picture it was on the left hand. So this is what the division bench says. This amounts to intelligent copying, and intelligent copying is no excuse to copying. Holding so, the division bench also grants injunction, and it also talks about damages, where which is again a very surprising thing. Both counsel, when they actually argued the appeal, started by saying whoever wins, the other party will give them damages of 500 rupees. And that was what was granted by the division bench. So just 3 pages, AR 1961, Madras 111, 111, 112, 113. That's all. And a very short.
Satish,
yes,
the
sir.
interesting thing in this is the judge, Justice Ganapati Pillai, he refers to an English judge and saying, see, what is similarity? What are the hypotheses of similarity? He quotes 4 hypotheses of similarity.
Exactly.
It can be mere chance. It can be both work being taken from a common source.
Yes.
The number 3, plaintiff's work being taken from the defendant, or defendant work being taken from the plaintiff. There will be infringement when the plaintiff's work is taken from the defendant. They actually discuss, they quote this. These are probably the 4 possible ways when 2 work could be similar. If you take it, if it is a mere chance, no infringement. If it is taken from a common source, no infringement. If the plaintiff has taken it from the defendant, then it's an infringement for the defendant, not for the plaintiff. So the court has to go through in 3 pages. They have discussed in such short, succinct way, but clearly and categorically giving what copyright is all about.
Yeah, this is the one which Mr. Rajesh was saying was quoted from Corelli versus Gray, which is in paragraph 9 of the judgment, 1913's judgment, paragraph 9 in that judgment. You have the next slide.
This, again, 3 judgments that we are talking about. The first,
this is number 2.
This is number 2. The first one is about the picture of Murugan, Bala Murugan, this is Mayura Priya. This is a picture of Mahatma Gandhi in a sitting posture. The third one that Divakar will talk of is also a picture of Subramanya in his boyhood called Kumara Durbara. So it is basically these pictures which, in a way, you can say that these are all very common. You have, being in South India, Tamil Kadavul, it is common. But even with those common pictures, to actually pull out and say, yes, there is possible, there are possible ways of even infringing. There is a certain way of claiming copyright. There is a copyright, and there are certain ways of where you can also infringe these common pictures, which is so prevalent. This is just for 1961 Madras 114. The previous one is 111. This is 114. This is about a portrait of a Mahatma Gandhi in sitting posture. What happened in this case is that the plaintiff, this is also under the 1914 Act. So why we stress on the word 1914 Act is because under the 1914 Act, the word colorable imitation was used in the definition of an infringement of copyright. There can be a even a colorable imitation would be held infringing a copyright of a copyright author or owner. So this is about a poster of a Mahatma Gandhi in a sitting, portrait of a Mahatma Gandhi in a sitting posture, where the beauty of this judgment is that every possible available defense that was taken by the defendant in this case is that one, Mahatma Gandhi in a sitting posture, the plaintiff cannot have copyright because it is very common. Two, even if the court holds that there is a copyright in this picture, I have not infringed it. Three, the first defendant is only a printer, not a publisher. And therefore he says, I'm only a printer. I have not published it. So there cannot be an infringement against me and there cannot be any damages because this is a case where there was a damage. The trial court decreed the suit and also granted a damage for 10,000 rupees. You can't agree to a damage against a printer because my job, somebody gives me a work, I just print it. I don't publish it. I don't sell it. So there cannot be damages as against the printer. So every possible, and last but not least, the defendant also here says, see, I don't know if, one, there is no copyright. Two, I don't know the plaintiff had copyright in it. I am a printer, not a publisher. And therefore, no infringement, no damages. And the infringing portrait is also inferior in quality to the plaintiff's portrait. And therefore, there is no infringement. So every possible, no copyright. If you think that there is a copyright, I have not infringed it. If you think I have infringed it, I am only a printer, not a publisher. So everything that a defendant can take. So this judgment deals with what the plaintiff can claim, what the defense that a defendant can take, and so beautifully it has been analyzed both in the trial court and in the division bench. Here, the court says, and I'm just going to read. The term artistic work would comprise paintings, sculptures, drawings, engravings, and photographs, and works of architecture, etc. The word artistic was merely used in the definition as a generic term to include the different process of creating work set out in the definition section. And provided that a work was produced by one such process and that its creation involved some skill or labor on the part of the artist, then it was protected. So all it needs is skill and labor. And the beauty about this case is also is that the defendant was able to establish that the plaintiff painted this picture copying from two different pictures. The court actually found that the head was from one picture and the body was from the another picture. But still, the court said there is skill and labor in combining this. There is skill and ingenuity in such combination. And therefore, there will be copyright in this. So the original artistic work does not talk about need not be considered to be artistically genius. That the originality that is required under the Copyright Act is low, and all it needs is skill and labor in combining anything. That is new. There is no similar portrait which was available before, and therefore there is copyright in it. And the defendant further said, look at the two pictures. In one picture, Gandhiji would be holding, I think, a paper. The defendant came up with a similar picture where Gandhiji would be holding a book or something. That is different. So he was, again, the same way Satish was referring to in the previous case, R. Vidyasagar. He was trying to come up with the R. Vidyasagar. But again, please look at this particular thing. Combination made by plaintiffs by combining two pictures was a result of skill and labor employed by plaintiffs for which copyright success. So therefore, the plaintiff's copyright was acknowledged, it was protected, and the beauty, the defendant also in the appeal raises the issue of estoppel. Because actually, I don't want to go deep into it, but there is a prior suit which was settled, and he says all these things were not raised there, and therefore there's an issue of estoppel. And again, here says, and the court very clearly says, issue of estoppel is a mixed question of fact and law, and it has to be pleaded. So artistic work, original artistic work, there is copyright, and there is copyright in this combination, and no, you cannot, principle of estoppel has to be pleaded, and there is infringement because you have taken it when both the portraits look similar, going up with what the previous case said, and it says it. And last but not least says, the court says, I think it is Chief Justice Rajamanna, beautifully written. The Chief Justice says, for the argument that it is an inferior quality, a bad copy does not cease to be a copy. I love that statement. A bad copy does not cease to be a copy, which means that does not matter what your quality of copying is. You have copied it, there is infringement. And last but not least, in the issue of damages, the trial court has granted damages of 10,000 rupees. And the law of damages, if you discuss it, it's again a very interesting thing, but we'll not go deep into it. The principle of damages, very succinctly, Justice Rajamanna says, I'm just going to, it is based on estimates. So under the 1914 Act, Section 6 was talking about infringement of copyright. Section 7, remedies. Section 6, remedies against infringement of copyright. Section 7, where you can claim injunction and damages. Section 7, against a conversion of those, like making further prints. And so, while estimating damages, Justice Rajamanna says, each and everything has to be distinctly pleaded in the plaint itself. You will have to plead that there is an infringement of copyright, there is damage because of the infringement of copyright, and there is printing of these pictures across, it is available in the market, therefore there is further printing, further conversion of my work, and therefore there is damages. These two things have to be succinctly pleaded in the plaint, which the plaintiff did not do it. And therefore, at the end of the day, what the Justice Rajamanna did was he reduced the damages from 10,000 to 5,000 rupees. This is in 1961. 5,000 rupees as damages was awarded. And nowadays, I don't think you can even imagine damages being awarded by any court. I think only Delhi, I've heard of only Delhi High Court granting damages. Very, very rarely we get damages being awarded in any High Court now. But if you read this judgment, the law of copyright, in fact, they also quote, this is about artistic work. They also quote an English judgment in talking about literary work, saying that more as both artistic work and literary work, it need not be, identical. It is enough if substantial part of it is copied, even if it is inferior. A bad copy does not cease to be a copy. Say it's one of the I would highly even request people to just go through these three judgments, because I think in the past 2 weeks, all three of us would have read these judgments twice, thrice. Every time we read it, it's so lovely. We haven't stopped reading these judgments. I think
Just to add on the damages part, in fact, the judge actually extracts the cross-examination in the last paragraph and says why he is actually giving the damages that is actually awarded in that case. So it is actually a compendium of the first principles on copyright law, I think. Divakar, we can go to the next.
And the last of the triumvirate of cases of Madras High Court will be Daily Calendar Supply Bureau. What has been discussed in the two previous cases has been succinctly distilled in this case, but there is one major difference between the last two cases in this case. Last two cases were under the 1914 Act. This probably is one of the first cases to be brought under 1957 Act. The suit itself was filed in 58, and the entire discussion has been on the under the 57 Act of Copyright, which, according to me, again, according to all three of us, holds good until this day and the days to come. So, just to give a brief outline of the facts, this case is also, as Mr. Rajesh has said, this is also about a picture of Lord Muruga. This time it is in an avatar, so to say, of Muruga, known as Kumara Guruparan. Now, the plaintiff had formulated this particular picture, and he has expressed, he has drawn it on an, he has drawn it, and this has been used as part of the calendars and other things, and all those things were there. So, multiple copies of the plaintiff's picture has come into the market. The market is basically flooded with the plaintiff's pictures. The defendant, on the other hand, has come up with a very similar picture, not the exact identical, but very similar picture, because there are slight differences between the plaintiff's pictures and the different pictures. So, the plaintiff filed a suit against the defendant under the 57 Act. Now, the defendant, for infringement and consequential reliefs, the defendant came up with 5 main grounds of defense, being that, one, what the defendant has come up with is completely based on the agamas and the Silpa Sastras that are there of pertaining to Lord Muruga. Therefore, it is what the defendant has tried to argue is that it is culled out from a common source. Therefore, there is no infringement. That is number one. Then number two is that he has engaged a person other than himself. He has engaged a person other than himself who has drawn it based on the agamas and Silpa Sastras. Therefore, he cannot be held responsible for the infringement. Number two. Number three, to say that it was not true that the defendants copied the plaintiff's pictures. There are vast differences between the plaintiff's and the defendant's pictures. He argued that there was a material difference between the two pictures themselves. And the last criteria, last ground was that the Madras High Court did not have jurisdiction to maintain this case or try this case. Was the last because under the 1957 Act, the Section 62 was brought in, but the previous what the defendant argued was that district court is the criteria given under the 1957 Act. Therefore, High Court, not being a district court, cannot have jurisdiction. Was the razor-thin argument that was brought in by the defendant. So these are the 5 arguments that were brought out by the defendant, and the judges had the opportunity of looking at the trial that had gone, the entire case, and they analyze and dissect each and every part of the trial, and now come up with a very succinct way of finding the similarities and the substantial and to hold that the defendant has substantially reproduced the plaintiff's picture. So I think Mr. Rajesh and Mr. Satish would love to dissect the various parts of the judgment. Mr. Rajesh, would you like to start on the dissection?
Satish, why don't you start with the?
What I found in this judgment, which as trial lawyer, which I'm fascinated by, was the fact one of the evidences given in this court by the plaintiff. In fact, what he does is the plaintiff, he reduces the photograph by a mechanical process, and each reduction of both the photographs, each reduction gives the same kind of measurements. I don't know. I mean, in my limited experience, I haven't tried such an evidence to be given in court. But when I read the judgment, I thought probably in one of those cases we can actually try this. In fact, I'll just read that portion where it's where the reproduction part is extracted. The plaintiff, by a well-known photographic process, reduced both his painting and the defendant's painting to exactly similar dimensions. Thereafter, with the application of a pair of dividers, the distances were measured between crucial points in the two photographs, and the measurements were found to tally. The plaintiffs deposed that the measurements of the mouth, the nose, the ear, the palm are equal in both the figures. the distances between the tip of the forehead to the second mark between the forehead where the hair begins and up to the eyebrow where there was a rectangular mark is the same. There was no cross-examination of the plaintiff on this. I mean,
In fact,
I really feel shameful that to call myself a trial lawyer after reading this. Extremely beautiful way of presenting a case, of knowing what to do and knowing what not to do. And I think there is a lot of takeaways in this judgment. Besides this point, I think Mr. Rajesh, you can just finish.
No, the other thing, since you talked about the evidence, again, the other paragraph which I would like to read in this is because we are taking maximum time on these three judgments because it actually sets out the foundation of the law of infringement, law of copyright and law of infringement. This will kind of will be a little bit, but we won't hold you from your lunch. In this matter, the judge discusses about the basic features of all the deities in the Hindu religion. In fact, it is better to read it. Now, we will take, this is again in paragraph 19, I have an SEC copy. Now, we will take the elements of the plaintiff's picture in which he can be considered as having a copyright within the meaning of section 14. It purports to be a representation of the deity Lord Subramanya in human form. Anthropomorphic representation of Hindu deities in 2 or 3-dimensional material is a normal feature of Hindu art. It is done not merely for an artistic objective, but also for a religious purpose to help the devotee in meditating on their favorite god or deity. The 3-dimensional representation in the form of idols are installed in temples, while the 2-dimensional pictures are kept in houses. The pictures are often used for daily worship. In recent times, there has been a work to print these pictures on calendars as a form of advertisements. The characteristic features of those representations is to impress the well-known attributes of a deity, such as conferment of moon, Vara, which is shown by one hand with palm down, and protection, Abhaya, by another hand with palm and fingers upwards. To show the attributes of great power, additional arms are often provided, equipped with weapons like discus or mace or sword. Additional heads are provided to indicate omniscience. It cannot be considered that there could be copyright for those ideas of the reality which find expression in the Agamas and the Silpa Shastras. The law of copyright. What can be copied? These are the attributes of the Hindu god. Raising one hand is Abhaya. So the attributes, if it is copied, that cannot be protected. But if there are certain distinct features in a work, in an artistic work, which are copied, that has to be provided. Saying that what is available in Agama and Silpa Shastras cannot be protected. The court still went ahead and found that there is an infringement and granted infringement in this case. That is the beauty of this. And there is the other difference which the defendant here takes is that the section 52(1)(I) is section 52 is exceptions to the infringement. What are not acts that are not infringement of copyright? 52(1)(I) talks about, I'll read that. Making or publishing of a painting, drawing, engraving, photograph, or sculpture or other artistic work falling under class 3 of section 2, if such work is permanently situated in a public place or a premises to which the public has access, will not constitute an infringement of copyright. This is an exception to infringement. This defense was taken because the picture of the plaintiff's picture of Kumara Gurubarar, the plaintiff gave some pictures and these pictures were found in a lot of temples. So the exception is that if any picture or sculpture is found in a public place, a copy of that is not an infringement. So it's a beautiful difference. See, I saw the picture in a temple. It is a public place. So I made a copy of it. He says, yes, take, even if it is a copy, I made a copy from a public place, and therefore that is not an infringement. The court beautifully digests this, digresses from the point and says, the intention of the plaintiff is not to keep it in public place. His intention is to sell it commercially. And to do that, he has also given some free copies to the temples, which was available in a temple place. And therefore, the defense cannot take shelter under the exception to the infringement under section 52 IM says, I have taken it from a public place and therefore it is not an infringement. So please look at the reach of this judgment. The gamut, the entire gamut of the law of copyright, the entire gamut of the infringement, the defenses, beautiful defenses. I mean, I was surprised. I don't think I would have thought about this defense. Yes, there is a defendant who has copied it. Yes, it is common. You can argue that there is no copyright. But if there is copyright, even if there is copyright, I have taken it from a temple, which is available in Pioneer somewhere. And that is an exception because taking copies, photos, copies, or prints of something available in a public place is not an infringement. Everything that you can, as a counsel, do in a law of copyright is available in this document.
Just to add on to what Mr. Rajesh and Satish had said, and to give a closure to this entire procedure in the entire case, two very important points were discussed in this case. What was not there, even statutorily, what was not there in the previous proceedings, previous two cases. What has been discussed here is that what is the import of removal of the words colorable imitation from the 1957 Act. So what the defendants counsel had very brilliantly argued was that since there was no mention of the word colorable imitation, phrase colorable imitation in the 57 Act, then colorable imitations are allowed, is what the argument put forth by the defendants counsel. He said, the judgment, I'm just quoting the judgment, it says, it was contended that any person could now make a colorable imitation of a painting or other artistic work without being held guilty of infringement of a copyright meant in section 2.1. So, the judgment goes on to say that what Act 14 of the 57 Act did apparently was to bring together the definition of the infringement into one place. It has culled out from the English Act of 1911, what Mr. Rajesh had previously mentioned in Kania versus Balraj, Associated Press. So what the judges finally come to conclusion is that it therefore appears quite likely that when 1957 Act was repealed, 1957 Act repealed the earlier enactments and consolidated the law of copyright in India, it adopted the procedure followed in the English Act of 56 of using the word reproduction, both of the work itself or substantial part of it, as sufficient indication of scope of the infringement, and dropped the term colorable imitation as superfluous or redundant. Therefore, colorable imitation has now been removed from the procedure, from the provisions of the law, and has been replaced by reproduction, which includes substantial reproduction. Therefore, even a substantial reproduction is liable for infringement, is what the courts have come to conclude. Now, what amounts to substantial reproduction has been very, very brilliantly brought out by the judges, as Mr. Satish had pointed out. The combination or the comparison of the pictures by scaling them down to known mathematical formula and analyzing it based on mathematical measurements, the courts were able to find that the pictures have, or the defendant's picture has been substantially a reproduction of the plaintiff's picture. Now, the counsel for the defendant had argued this way. The color scheme of the pictures are different. The size of the two pictures are different. Shape of the face is not a copy. Hair of the defendant's painting is more curly. Nose of the plaintiff's picture is more snappy. The lips of the defendant picture are better proportioned. Ornaments of the ears are different. All these differences have been brought out by the counsel for the plaintiff. But the court, to negate all those things, brought out the mathematical formula of scaling them down to equal proportions and then finding the mathematical similarities between the two pictures, came to a conclusion that it is these substantial elements in the representation of the pictorial form of the conception of Lord Subramanya that the plaintiff's copyright essentially consisted. The reproducer, after incorporating these elements in his painting, could add a deeper color of the lips, or he could give a darker shade to the hair, or make it more curly. He could add a veil to a few of them, but the essential reproduction of the substantial features of the plaintiff's picture has already been effected, and that constitutes infringement of the copyright, is what the end product of the entire case is all about. Therefore, the court has held that substantial features of the copyrighted material, if it is copied, then infringement is found. It need not be an exact reproduction.
So, if you read these three judgments, I think you will understand the entire law of copyright and the infringement of copyright. In fact, this is still the law now, except in 2010 in the Eastern Book Company case, which we discussed in the last session, where the Supreme Court has added one more component to claim copyright, not just skill and labor, but minimum modicum of creativity should also be there in a copyright. That was added in 2010 by the Supreme Court, but skill and labor is what is required for to claim a copyright in a work, and that is still the case, except for that one more addition of minimum modicum of creativity by the Supreme Court in 2010. You are next.
So, coming out of the sway of this triumvirate of cases, we just go back to the necessities that are there for coming out with an infringement proceeding. So, what the courts have held in that, again, Madras, 1976, held that registration is not mandatory for bringing out an action for infringement. So, if all you have to do is that you have to prove to the court that you are within the purview of Section 14, and nothing else is required. Registration is therefore not mandatory to bring out an action for infringement. Satish sir.
You.
So, yes.
Right. Good.
Yes, sir. Yes, Satish sir.
No, in fact, there is there are a set of suits filed, which are called John Doe suits. It was actually an American invention, if you could call it that, where suits are filed against unknown defendants. Usually, civil suits can be filed. Even CPC provides that. But where the defendant, especially after the internet-related or internet-induced infringements happening, this kind of suits are quite popular today. It was in America. It was called either John Doe or Jane Doe, male and female version. In India, it is called Ashok Kumar, where there will be just the name Ashok Kumar as the defendant number one. No address, age, father's name not known to the plaintiff. So it is essentially against a unknown defendant. You can still file a suit because you don't know where the infringement is happening. Much like our Tamil rockers issues. Basically, we don't know where it is from. In every single movie that releases, in whatever language, there is a suit. There is a John Doe suit filed in at least in any of the courts in India to prevent internet piracy, and the courts have almost become it has almost become a routine matter. It is some of like this is like a covered judgment. Oh, John Doe, all right. This is the usual order, usual pleading, usual finding. We just have to see the rights of the plaintiffs and so on. So this has become the order of the day in cases where it relates to infringement through the internet. So these are cases where piracy happens in the internet or with the help of the internet. Rajesh sir, 52A.
See, the Parliament introduced this provision because piracy became one of the rampant it actually, one of my seniors in Delhi, Mr. Chandalal, used to address it as a rape on creativity. He used to call piracy as a rape on creativity, which is actually the case it is. Both sound recording, the audio cassette companies, and the film industry are still reeling because of piracy. So Parliament introduced this particular provision, Section 52A into the Copyright Act, to say what the original, genuine sound recording and a film should have in its physical copy. This, Section 52A, by introducing that, it becomes easier for the enforcement authorities, or also for those people, if you go and buy an original audio CD or a DVD or a DVD of a film, there are certain particulars which are required to be printed on that physical copy. If it is not, if these particulars are not there, then it is not original. If these particulars are there, it is original. And therefore, the Supreme Court even took it to the another extent, saying that you don't need a complainant to come and complain that these particulars are there or not there. The police ex officio suo motu can act on these things, find out whether these particulars are there. If these particulars are not there, then it is not original. You can seize it. So Section 52A, 1 talks about the particulars required to be printed on a sound recording, like a sound recording is like audio CD or a cassette. 52A 2. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Yes, they do. All the original things.
No. Whether the CDs or cassettes are available is what I'm asking.
I think CDs are. I'm not. Cassettes obviously not. CDs are available. Audio CDs are available. MP3s and all, including MP3s. Any sound recording, including MP3s. These particulars. The name of the manufacturer, the name of the owner. And when it comes to 52A2 as films, the certificate issued by the censor board should be available on the physical copy, as is the names and address of the manufacturer of the CD and name and address of the copyright owner. If it is not there, then it is illegal. If it is there, it is genuine. That is a difference, and actually after the introduction of this provision, and actually there was a lot of it has actually become a weapon to the enforcement authorities and to all the copyright owners to fight against that illegal copying. Still, again, this is one example that I had. Burma Bazaar. When I started working for Lal & Sethi firm, we used to represent this Motion Picture Association. So we, Burma Bazaar, obviously, you know what happened right across the court, right across the police station, you still have pirated things there. There's a lot of other law and order issues, so it is very difficult for them to control that. So one of the video piracy cell, superintendent of police, he said, Rajesh, come, let us go, let us see, conduct a raid in one of the Burma Bazaar shops. We went there, you have seen the Burma Bazaar shop, it's very, 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 very small. There is, even if you, obviously, there are not more than probably 100 or 200 CDs or VCDs or DVDs kind of exhibited there. So we didn't see anything, they were all old movies, and we could not see any pirated things, there was no big hall. So the superintendent of police was like, guys, let's go. As we were turning back, we heard a sound from underground. Small shop. Just there was hardly a space for 2 people to stand inside, but there was a noise from underground. As we were turning, and then we said, where is this coming from? And there was an opening on the floor. They opened it. There was a stairs. There was an underground room. And they had one master CD which can make 10 copies. I'm talking about 15, 20 years ago. One master copying, making 10 copies simultaneously. And if a new movie is released, it is run for 3 days, 4 days continuously. So one night they can make 3,000 pirated copies in that one single shop in Burma Bazaar. We seized that because the moment they come to know that obviously the information will leak, all piracy will vanish from the shop. But this guy sitting in the basement, I think, did not know that the SP was there. Unfortunate for him, he got caught, and that is how we came to know there are undergrounds in Burma Bazaar shops also. So this actually gave a lot of teeth, lot of weapon to the enforcement authorities, to the copyright owners to curb piracy.
Yes. Yeah, we can move on. Yeah, and this judgment of 2017, 18 rather,
1990.
19, I'm sorry, actually goes a long way in doing something that has never been done before in the Indian jurisprudence. Two things. The judgment defines firstly what is called a rogue website. Now, with the internet, the difficulty in enforcement is the most cumbersome process. You grant injunction against X, there will be X1. You grant injunction against X1, there will be X2. So these are things which we could never prevent, or it still remains a challenge. Therefore, in this particular case, UTV software, the Delhi High Court actually did something called they granted what is called a dynamic injunction. The injunction basically is against a site which the plaintiff initially knows about, and when there is a change in circumstances, when there is a different site which comes up with the same infringement, it need not file a second suit or something, but using the provisions of the Delhi High Court rules, it granted the power to the joint registrar to issue directions. In fact, the process or the thought process came out for the Delhi High Court from a Singapore legislation which had the power actually, but unfortunately the Indian Copyright Act as yet does not have such power. But it said I can do it under 151 of the Civil Procedure Code, and they introduced this particular provision to say that whenever there is a mirror website or a duplicate website of the same defendant, that had to be a certainty. If that was the case, then an application under Order 1 Rule 10 of the Civil Procedure Code to add a party was to be presented before the registrar of the court, so that you don't have to do it in the court and waste judicial time as such. So an application under Order 1 Rule 10 under 151 of the CPC will be presented before the registrar, who was empowered to pass a direction, and with that they could enforce it. So this is what they called a dynamic injunction, and this is a new addition. I'm not sure whether this has been followed in the Madras High Court yet. To my knowledge, it hasn't been, but I think probably very soon we will also be granting dynamic injunctions from the Madras High Court.
But adding on to what Mr. Satish had just succinctly explained what the court has talked about, held in this case, dynamic injunction. The court has also brought in an additional suggestion to the Government of India to impose certain levies on the viewers. So there is a possibility in a later point of time, for the government to include a viewer or the end customer to also be part of the chain of infringement. So the chain of infringement as on date only stops with the seller, how we saw in the previous slide. Now the viewer or the user is also being brought in, the suggestion is being made by the Delhi High Court. User or the viewer is also brought in the chain of infringement. So that kind of a direction has also been given, suggestion has been given by the Delhi High Court to the viewer.
So that's what I said in the beginning, like practically from the manufacturer till the end user, everybody could be an infringer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next, see, we spoke of infringement. What acts are all constitute to be infringement of a copyright? There is one big important provision which talks about what are not infringement of copyright, what acts cannot be considered as infringement. We are not giving you the provision as such, we just rush through this because there are a couple of things which are very important as far as this is concerned. Diwakar, why don't you just speak to it? I'll stop whenever I need to.
So basically, just to run through the bullet points, private use for research, criticisms or reviews or parodies are also out of the purview of infringement. Making copies for the utilization or backup, reproduction for judicial proceedings, legislative use for the purpose of legislative authorities, the members of parliament to look into, members of parliament and the state legislature to look into it. Certified copies made according to law, reading or recitation in public, and making of sound recording if made by, or this last one, the making of sound recording if made by or with the license and the consent of the owner or the writer's work has undergone a few changes. We will look into it in the next slide, which will be remakes and version recordings. Rajesh sir.
Yeah, see, the remakes has to be removed from here.
Yeah.
But anyways, the pre-2010 position, 2012 position was that there was an exception under section 52(1)(j), which has been repealed in 2012, and this section 31C has been added in 2012. Version recording, I'll just take a minute in probably discussing what a version recording is. I'm sure most of you would have kind of bought those days audio cassettes of T-Series. T-Series creating and commercializing a version of a sound recording which is already available, made by a different party. For example, hits of Kishore Kumar, hits of Mohammed Rafi. It is not copy of the sound recording, but the entire musical instrument, the singers, the entire arrangement, everything recorded in a studio, and that recording is being released commercially. A cover version of what is already available before is a version recording. Obviously, you know what a remake is. Under pre-2012 era, this was dealt with under section 52(1)(j), where it was purely made an economic right for the owner to why is that? It was purely an economic right to give teeth to some people to make money out of the sound recording. So the 52(1)(j) said, wait for 2 years. If you want to make a version of what is already available, wait for 2 years, give a notice to the owner of the copyright and say that I want to make a cover version of the sound recording. Wait for 15 days. Whether you get a consent or not, you go and record it. The moot question was whether the consent was required or not. In fact, it went all the way to Supreme Court. I was part of a trial also in Supreme Court, Bangalore, and where we argued that consent is necessary. You cannot make a version recording without the consent of the owner. But there was, I think, Mr. Kapil Sibal, one of the Supreme Court judgment, Kapil Sibal argued that consent is not required because a version recording is more like a statutory license, and you don't need consent of the owner of the copyright. So in 2012, legislature, because of all this controversy, they brought this particular provision, section 31C. It repealed to 52(1)(j), brought in 31C, saying you make cover version, but you will have to make a minimum of 50,000 copies annually. You give copies of that in advance to the copyright owner. You pay the royalty, I think 5% or something, to the copyright owner in advance. But it can be done only after 5 years of the sound recording being available commercially. So they made it a little stringent than what it was earlier. So 52(1)(j) was repealed, 31C was brought in. Again, my grouse in this thing is only the economic rights, that is the commercial rights of the copyright owners, were considered. What about the author? If the author and the owner are one and the same, no problem. But more often than not, say for example, recent example is that the issue that A.R. Rahman raised at the beginning of the COVID lockdown. Somebody actually remade the song Masakali. And he majestically said this is the original version. There was a lyricist who said this should not be allowed, etc., etc. The author, he has given his right to somebody else. The owner has a right. The owner can assign it, license it, he can do whatever he wants. But the author's special right, the moral right, has not been considered even under the Act. So, my personal view, probably it needs a little more tuning, where even version recordings or remakes, not on the economic point of view, but on the moral point of view, saying that, because the entire intellectual property, the copyright or intellectual property is to further the arts and cultures, inventions and everything. If you're going to leave out the people who are responsible for such creative rights, then there is no possibility of further creation. There is no possibility of originality there. So the author's special rights should be given a little more teeth, and I think at least the small effect of taking consent from the author, not commercially, just a consent to make these version recordings, to make these remakes, would give some more, would satisfy those authors. Diwakar, why don't you go through this?
So when talking about version recordings, we have a couple of cases which we will just mention. So what the law was at that point of time, 1996 and 99, to the provision, to the cases that dealt with 52(1)(j) of the Copyright Act. So the first one, incidentally, both cases had the same parties. The first one being the cover version of the hit Hindi movie Hum Aapke Hain Kaun, where the court held that version recordings are possible. It is available under the Copyright Act, and the only difference being that in the version recording, you cannot, the defendant cannot use the same title or the inlay cards or all those things. That is 1996. 1999 is where the consent issue was first brought in. So what happens here is that the defendant says, in that case, they had issued a check to the plaintiff, but incidentally the check had been returned by the plaintiffs, which the court held that returning of the check is a clear indication that there is no consent, therefore injunction was done. Those were the two cases under the, those were the two cases which were before the Delhi High Court. Now, Mr. Rajesh had talked about one case which went on to the Supreme Court, which is the next slide.
Diwakar, I think I've spoken about it.
Covered about. But the only thing is the Supreme Court did not venture into all these things. They did not.
It went back, and by the time 2012, there was an amendment, so it is now redundant.
And exceptions with regard to education, Satish sir.
In fact, in educational institutions, there are certain exceptions which are given under the Copyright Act, which are still there in 52. One of the exceptions, which is next slide. One of the exceptions which is of great importance is the issue of fair use. So if you actually use any copyright material, whether it is a literary work, dramatic work, musical work, as a defense, you can have fair use. You can have next slide. Now, what amounts to a fair use is not being defined under the Act. I don't think definitely not under the Act, but even across the world, I don't think fair use has been defined as a legal provision. But what amounts to fair use is that it has to be minimal, and it has to be only for the point of education in an educational institution. Now, there is a very interesting case which actually had come out of this, where there was a photocopying shop inside a Delhi university, where books, foreign books written by foreign authors and published by Oxford University Press, was being photocopied in toto and sold to the students. Now the publishers, the entire set of publishers, brought an action against the photocopying services and the Delhi University. The Delhi University was the second defendant, where they said this is not fair use. This is in fact unfair use, because what you are doing is you are not just taking experts of my work, but you are actually copying my entire books, which they said was wrong. But however, the Delhi High Court gave a very wider interpretation to the expression fair use and said at the end of the day, this is only for education. Therefore, what the photocopying shops did was not wrong. The matter went up on appeal, but in the appeal, the matter got settled, and the publishers went on to say that we do not want to fight with our stakeholders. I don't know. I mean, I would have essentially loved the matter to have actually run its course to see what the law on fair use is. But unfortunately, the matter has been settled now, so we don't have a definitive definition as to what fair use is, which is still being done on case-to-case basis.
This line which is there is very important. Copyright is not inevitable, divine, or natural right that confers. It has to promulgate more intellectual enrichment. It has to promulgate more creativity.
That is why I said the definition of fair use is widened to an extent where it's now a big hole. I mean, you can actually fall. If practically anything that is subject of copyright could fall into this aspect and get lost. But anyway, and this particular judgment, there was a copyright in this photograph which the Associated Press had, and the Obama the campaign used the bottom portion when they used this particular photograph. The matter went to court. They said this amounts to fair use again, but again, unfortunately, this matter was settled. So I don't know why matters of fair use simply get settled, because some definitive judgments we are missing on this.
This case is more on parody, Rajesh sir.
See, America has kind of evolved further. We are still reaching there because now everything is available far and wide. Parody is considered to be part of fair use. This is one of the first cases. In fact, I'm very fond of this particular case because it's one of the first cases I was taught when I studied copyright law in the US. This is a band called Aqua, and most of you would know that there's a song called "I'm a Barbie Girl." It's a very popular song. It became a huge hit. I think Aqua is a Danish band or an Irish band. I don't remember what exactly it is. Matter said you are using Barbie, you are using the character Barbie, and you are depicting it. That is an infringement of my copyright in that Barbie doll. Supreme Court said no, it is not an infringement. It is only a fair use. Sorry, it is only a parody, and therefore parodies are not infringement. It only furthers the reputation of the original. And so it is not an infringement. It will fall under the definition of fair use or fair dealing, and therefore there is no infringement in this case. So if you look at going to the American copyright law, you will find a lot of parody videos now. You will have a lot of parody videos on Michael Jackson's songs, on Madonna's. They started with it, and the way they have discussed the fair use exception in the American law is fantastic. So if you have an opportunity to read the judgment, it will be very interesting. Next. And we will rush through the copyright society because I just want to mention it here, because for some reason the Copyright Act, the Indian Copyright Act, gives right to the authors to create a society to manage, the rights management group, it is called, to manage the rights, to grant licenses for third parties to use their work, and have to collect royalties and pay those royalties to the copyright owners, and they take some commission over it. There are two copyright societies in India: Indian Performing Rights Society and PPL, Phonographic Performing Limited, I think. So one is for sound recording, the other is for live recordings, live musical works. So these two,
one is essentially for the musicians, the other is for the producers.
Exactly. This is always a controversial provision because I don't know, many of you would have experience. So even playing songs in a hotel, they will immediately, somebody from PPL or IPRO will come and say, you buy license from me. If you are having a concert somewhere, the concert people, they will be there saying that, oh, we have a concert, you need, whether the concert, the singers is going to sing songs which they have copyright or not, will not be of interest for them. They say, I don't know, at 400, they have a certain way of calculating the royalty. The hall has a capacity of 400 people. So 400 into so and so amount of rupees, you pay me this much of rupees, or else I'm filing a complaint against you. And failing the reputation, they will all pay the money and everything. And it went all the way up to the, I think, Delhi High Court, a couple of matters. They said, sorry, I'm not granting you this. You don't have copyright for all these things. But then now the Delhi High Court has formed, they have in fact, the license was also expired and it took them 4 or 5 years for them to renew the license. Now the license is renewed, the copyright societies are back. But I would love an opportunity to challenge them at some point, because these people really create havoc amongst the many innocent people. Satish, this is your case.
I definitely disagree from that. I mean, you use copyright, you have to pay. I don't think there is a change to that.
No, using copyright is okay. How do you?
Fair enough. See,
I have no dispute there. It is a public use, yes. When if it is a publicly used, see, for example, there are some NGOs. Now the exception is very clear after 2012, and I think it has reduced.
In fact, there has been a latest clarification by the government where it says for private functions like marriages, etc., you need not obtain the permission from any of
that was my problem, because you don't give them notice. What they do is they will go with the cops when the program is happening, and they will say, "You pay me now." Those things I couldn't agree. There is a way of dealing with this, and that these corporate societies couldn't follow. But anyways, now I think probably they have changed. I think they also had issues because their accounts were not properly maintained for a very long time, and therefore the licenses were not renewed for a long time. But I think now it's sorted out. Anyways.
So as far as this particular case is concerned, 1977 Supreme Court, as I said in the beginning, this was the judgment where Justice Krishna Iyer was involved. In fact, Justice Krishna Iyer's was a concurring judgment, which added a little more to the main judgment. But essentially, the judgment was about two things. There is a musical work and there is a sound recording. Once the musical work or the sound recording gets subsumed into a bigger work, which is the cinematograph film, whether the musical work or in essence, whether the composer has a separate right or not, was the issue. In 1977, the Supreme Court held no, the producer or the producer, that is the producer of the cinematograph film, has all the rights if the some musical work gets subsumed, and the composer actually does not get any right. And this is where Justice Krishna Iyer butts in and says, in fact, it is very unfortunate. The law is there, the judgment is correct, but why should not the musical work the composer get something? After all, he is the one who creates it, and that is where the dichotomy began, and which till date I think remains unresolved. There have been next please. There have been judgments of the Bombay High Court where the Bombay High Court took a rather a middle path and said both of them actually have a right. If you go and get rights from them, then it is fine. Or if you can go and get rights from the sound recording owners, that's also fine. But the difficulty is both of them are greedy. Now, if you get it from this man, that man will say no. You will have to get it from me also, and vice versa. And this is a situation where it went right up to the Supreme Court, and in my opinion, I think it's still not resolved clearly, because the Supreme Court then talks about a question of compulsory licensing and so on, where this judgment, it has thrown it back to the Copyright Board, which again has been challenged before the Madras High Court, and the matter is still pending in the Madras High Court as to what would be the proper royalty which have to be paid, and to whom would I have to pay that, because there are both people claiming these rights. And we will just
a few landmark judgments we'll just breeze through. What was handled by
Divakar. Yes. Hold on, Divakar. Let Satish talk about the Macmillan Cooper, and then let us move on to the Ilayaraja case, because it's already.
No, we will straight away go there. No difference.
Right. So these are the important cases which will deal with the various aspects of the copyright law. Yes. Satish sir, you want to?
No.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah. Go to Ilayaraja. Yeah. This is because it's very important.
In fact, what happened in this case was the composer Ilayaraja filed cases against his own agreement holder, where he said, where the actual difficulty was, Mr. Ilayaraja had sold sound recording rights to a third party. And he said the third party has not been giving him royalties. And there was a case between them. There was a second suit where Mr. Ilayaraja adding the agreement holders and also added a sound recording company and said, even they are not providing me royalty. In fact, the factual issue there was that the sound recording company did not actually have a direct privity of contract with Mr. Ilayaraja, and therefore the question was whether they had any rights at all. And what they had to say was that they had rights directly from the producers, and there was a difference between musical work and a sound recording. And this judgment very categorically holds two things. One, it says musical works belong to the composers, but sound recordings do not belong to the composers. That is a very categorical statement. In fact, the sound recordings belong to the producers and producers alone. In fact, this judgment in a way follows the 77 Supreme Court IPRS case. So the middle path taken by the Bombay High Court has not been accepted by the Madras High Court. Single judge yet to reach the appellate stage. Single judge judgment given. It's almost year old plus. 9th of June was the single judge judgment. So far, no appeal has been filed. So this is the position as of now.
And since we are talking about remedies, criminal remedies are also available because we talk about reprisal and everything, a private complaint. The only thing is, as per Section 653, an investigation can be conducted by a police officer not below the rank of a sub-inspector. He can search, seize, it is a cognizable offence and a non-bailable offence.
And in fact, just to add on to that, in 2012, hacking has also been brought in as an offence under the as a criminal offence, and
yes,
exception has been given for ethical hacking for the purpose of governmental and.
Yes.
So these are a few myths about copyright.
Your favorite part.
We have discussed this fair use. Fair use does not mean that I don't require permission and I can use it as long as it is fair. No, the consent is mandatory, and that is where the Delhi University case had actually thrown the spanner in the works. So that is that is something that is to be decided. The second myth is that many people think that if I use a very small portion of a huge book, maybe 2 pages out of a 1000-page book, it is not infringement. No, it is not so. What is important is whether the work is substantial or not, whether there is a substantial reproduction or not. And that is a moot question. That is a question which has to be decided in each case. If it is substantial, it will be infringement, whether it is 2 pages, 2 seconds, or whatever. And finally, which is more important in the current scenario, is that if something is in the internet, many of us feel so. If something is in the internet, it is free. Please don't make no mistake about it. If it is in the internet, it still is protected under copyright. And any download, if it is unauthorized, amounts to an infringement. And I said, even the end user can be punished under the law. So each time we download a song from the internet, we are looking at 2 years of jail. And we wind up with Rajesh sir. We can finish this.
Yeah, again, going back to probably I will call this, I don't want to use the word Bible, I'll use the word Vedas for us. These 3 judgments, the Kanaya Company, the Balamurugan case, where Justice Ganapathy Pillai says this. Because that is how, if you read all the judgments, there is no clear way of saying this is a principle of law. It is impossible to lay down any rule which could serve as a useful test of what constitutes a copy or a colorable imitation. At all events, it is much easier to arrive at what does not than to define what does constitute the proper test of copy or colorable imitation. So, what is copy cannot be defined. It has to be analyzed as something which comes as close as possible. Okay, if you remember all the three judgments that we discussed, that is the sum and substance. So, skill, labor, minimum modicum of creativity, anything that a copyright owner can do, if it is done by a third party without a written authorization, then there is violation of the copyright. I hope we have covered the essential part of the law.
And we'll go to the first slide that we had in the first session. Whatever is worth copying is worth protecting.
Worth protecting.
That's what copyright law ultimately
that is. Exactly. So thank you all for your patience again almost to our session, and hopefully we'll meet you all again in another session. Suri?
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Rajesh. Thanks, Rajesh, Divakar, and Satish. Such a wonderful session, and an interesting part of the session was that I would say Rajesh's personal experience in Mangalore, I suppose. We went to raid with the video. It is really very informative about the three judgments of the Madras High Court, and about parody and all. For first time we are learning it at this point in time. Very, very, very interesting. And what could be copied, what is not, and what is the use of a right when you don't have a right to enforce it. Absolutely, how it could be enforced. Such in minutest details and all, you have given such a wonderful session. Looking forward for a lot more. God bless you all.
Thank you, Bala. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Always a pleasure. Suri?
Thank you all.
Bye now.
ஒரு எஃபெக்டோட சொல்றாங்க.
Okay, thank you everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah. Now you will not hear the echo. Hello.
End meeting with